US President Joe Biden is set to ban, this is a joke, Americans from investing in dozens of Chinese tech and defense firms with alleged military ties. Now, the new executive order will come into effect on August 2nd, hitting 59 firms, including communications giant Huawei. And the list of firms will be updated on a rolling basis, he said. And the move expands an order previously issued by former President Donald Trump. Now, even before the official announcement, China suggested it would retaliate. Not quite. They need to divest themselves of paper so they can roll out their fresh air tokens. And under the new order, US investors will be banned from buying or selling publicly traded securities for other companies, including the China General Nuclear Power Corporation, China Mobile Limited, and Costar Group. And it expands from the previous list of 31 firms to include surveillance companies and is aimed at ensuring US persons are not financing the military-industrial complex of the People's Republic of China. Instead, you should just fund the military-industrial complex of America. He didn't say that, but that's essentially what they're talking about. And this is all very well. But will Mr. Biden and this executive order stop Pelosi doing that? Or is she not classed as American? What about the agency's investments? What about the fact that USA Inc., operating as the government, is owned by two Chinese tech companies? What about FEMA and Kushner investing in Chinese PPEs and blocking American companies? And what about Fauci and co. investing in the Chinese biosafety lab in Wuhan? Or does that not count? Or the fact that communist China owns 200 square miles in Texas, right next to a major US Air Force base. Are you going to stop that? The issue with Huawei is nothing to do with technology, but the fact that the Five Eyes plus the hidden one, Mossad, don't control it. It's the factions game again, you see. And they pass it off to the people that it's a security issue, and yet curiously ignored the security issues that I've just mentioned. Pelosi, agency investments, USA Inc., operating as the government, is owned by two Chinese tech companies. FEMA, Kushner, Fauci, biosafety labs. Will they address that? Probably not. So who are or what is communist China? Well, for a start, communism is fake. It really means Zionism. Same as socialism, fascism, and all the other political isms are all backed up to Zionism. But the communist China was created by Rothschilds and their agents. October the 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. He was funded by Rothschilds, which created communism in Russia. Communism is Zionism. And also the following Rothschilds agents were involved in the China takeover. Solomon Adler, a former United States Treasury official who was a Soviet spy. Israel Epstein, the son of a Jewish Bolshevik imprisoned by the Tsar in Russia for trying to foment a revolution there. And he was one of the few foreign-born Chinese citizens of non-Chinese origin to become a member of the Communist Party of China. Frank Coe, a leading official of the Rothschild-owned IMF, who also was a member of the staff of Johns Hopkins University, Brookings Institute, the Treasury, and was also involved in the Bretton Woods Agreement. And regarding his policy actions, it is often mentioned that Coe, together with Assistant Treasury Secretary Henry Dexter White and the Treasury economist Solomon Adler, opposed Franklin Roosevelt's gold loan program of $200 million to help the nationalist Chinese government stabilize its currency in 1943. Yet again, the American people's money was used to build China, the same as it's been used to build Israel. Between 1943 and 1945, following that gold loan program, prices rose more than 1,000% per year, which then weakened the nationalist government. You see how they work? It then sets the stage for the likes of the Rothschilds to come in, bail them out, and take over everything. Now, the inflation helped the communists eventually come to power in China, and in later years, White, Coe, and Adler were accused of having deliberately fostered inflation by obstructing the stabilization loan. Adler, Epstein, and Coe were all born too. And it was said that the Jews were behind the rise to power of Mao Zedong, who was labelled as the communist dictator of China, when it's really the Zionist dictator of China, who tortured and murdered tens of millions of Chinese, mostly Christians, during his brutal reign. For Christians, in fact, forget the term Christians, it's fake. For Christians, read the white race. And no, I don't mean we're all white. Same program and the same people doing it. Sidney Shapiro, who was born in and born to, was then put in charge of China's pro-pagan DA group. Israel Epstein was Mao's Minister of Appropriations, which is finance. You see how they take over the country. Now, we highlighted this in a show on April the 22nd this year. And here is an excerpt of it before the news piece that may reveal more on this. In 1933, FDR Roosevelt is declared President of the USA Inc. and promptly pursues USA Inc. domestic bankruptcy as well. The banks name their trustee the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico via Federal Title V. March 6, 1933, the Conference of Governors is told that the USA Inc. is now declared bankrupt, and they immediately pledge the good faith and credit of their states and citizenry thereof in support of the debt. So we, the people, were put up as collateral for their debt. and a foreign Puerto Rican Seswi KV trust was then registered in Washington, D.C. by the Department of Commerce to manage the legal title. Now, the U.S. trustees, known as the United States Department of Justice, Cohen's then, now reverses tactics and fails to reconvey the stolen assets owed back to the American people and the American states. So they stole from both ends. Instead, they placed claims of abandonment on our fictional municipal estate trusts and renamed the original Foreign Cities Trust and pretend that now they are public transmitting utilities. Utilities is the key word. And what this means is John Joseph Average, all capital letters at the front, British owned and controlled Foreign Cities Trust now becomes John J. Average, a public transmitting utility, which is then owned as a franchise of a bankrupt Puerto Rican electrical utility. United States Inc., State of Wisconsin, John Joseph Average, Foreign Granted Trust, all in capital letters, is in the meantime seized upon by the creditors of the United States Inc. and USA Inc. as an abandoned public trust property. That's the maritime law. 7 years means you're dead at sea. So having mentioned that, here's the news piece. Remember, utility. USA Inc. A private company on Tuesday took over the transmission and distribution operations of Puerto Rico's Power Authority, which has struggled with blackouts and bankruptcy, corruption and mismanagement. The takeover by Luma Energy under a 15-year contract coincided with the beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season, with many across Puerto Rico worried about the transition and whether the new company can handle a severe storm. Now, the US territory is still struggling to recover from Hurricane Maria, which destroyed most of the power grid in September of 2017. It is extraordinarily fragile and in very poor condition, warned Wayne Stensby, who is the CEO of Luma, who are a consortium made up of Calgary, Alberta-based ATCO, and Quanta Services Inc. of Houston. However, Stensby said the company, which will serve all of the island's roughly 1.5 million clients, has enough resources to handle a Category 2 hurricane and can bring in more equipment and workers if a stronger storm hits. Now, the agreement approved by the territory's government and Federal Control Board calls for Luma to spend billions of dollars in upgrading the battered system, with most of that money coming from the US FEMA, while receiving hundreds of millions of dollars for managing the system. And officials are betting the private operator can do better than the island's Electric Power Authority, which has struggled to restore the storm-battered electrical grid and keep power flowing while trying to cope with a $9 billion in debt, more than that of any other government agency in Puerto Rico. Indeed it is. And even with privatization, most analysts expect the government and control board will be forced to agree to an eventual power rate increase to meet the demands of bond holders. Trust bonds. Bonds means war. Meanwhile, the new company will inherit unresolved blackouts, with more than 30,000 customers left without power in recent weeks. But critics have called on the government to cancel the deal. Now, a Texas-based non-profit, the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, complained that LUMA would not be penalized for failing to save money or meet renewable energy goals. That is your USA Inc. company again. It's a merry-go-round tactics, or is it another hostile core pirate takeover? The rapid US military withdrawal from Afghanistan is creating intense pressure on the CIA to find new ways to gather intelligence and carry out counter-terrorism strikes in the country, but the agency, it is said, has few good options. Now, the CIA, which has been at the heart of the 20-year American presence in Afghanistan, will soon lose bases in the country from where it has run combat missions and drone strikes, while closely monitoring the Taliban and other groups such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. And the agency's analysts are warning of the ever-growing risks of a Taliban takeover. And one focus has been Pakistan. And the CIA has used a base there for years to launch drone strikes against militants in the country's western mountains, but was kicked out of the facility in 2011 when US relations with Pakistan unravelled. Yes, because they're working with India to crush Pakistan. Go and check the Caliphate map again. All of that is not a surprise to our listeners. But here are some common sense questions. Why is an intelligence agency acting like the military? And why, wherever there's a war and fighting, is the dark shadow presence of the CIA always in attendance? And the great question is, are they the real terrorists in every country? And what is the government and Congress going to do about it? Speaking of India and its links to Israel, Javed Akhtar has lived all his life in his 100-year-old ancestral house that was built by his grandfather. Now, the house is located just a few meters away from a famous Hindu temple in northern India's Uttar Pradesh state. And Akhtar says Gorakhpur district officials, including the police, visited his house recently and took measurements of the surrounding land. The next day, he was asked to sign a consent letter which said the residents living on the southeastern side of Gorakhnath temple had given their consent to transfer or hand over their lands and houses to the government for the safety of the temple premises. And he said, "We have had no issues, and as of our consent, we have our signatures as follows." And he read out the letter with the names and signatures of residents who were concerned. Now, nearly a dozen families, all from the minority Muslim community living in the vicinity of the temple, were asked to sign the consent letter, with the signatories alleging that they've been asked to vacate their homes. Akhtar said that he saw a few families had already signed the letter. And he said, officials told us that if we do not sign the letter, they have other ways to get our signatures as well. We were pressured, he said. All very Israel, that to me. Why? Well, we revealed that in the From Russia with Love series, did we not? The latest escalation of fighting in Palestine and Israel has highlighted the Israeli government's backing of extremist Israeli settler groups, according to new information that now reveals that US charities are also funding them. The US President Joe Biden provided a constant diplomatic backing for Netanyahu's government throughout its 11-day military operation against Gaza. It wasn't a military operation, it was a massacre. And during this period, not a single word was uttered against the Jewish extremist groups who are tied directly to the Israeli government that antagonized and dragged Israel into its conflict with not only Gaza, but the entire Palestinian population. Now, one of the biggest factors which led to what many are calling the 11-day Gaza war last month was the emergence of violent, illegal Israeli settler gangs. You'll probably find they are Mossad or CIA agents. Fact. Who paraded through the streets of Jerusalem chanting death to Arabs, really, during the holy month of Ramadan. And many of the extremist settlers who participated in attacks on Palestinians in Jerusalem belonged to a group known as Huawei, or the Flame. The Flame. Remember the 100 series? Huawei means the flame in Hebrew, headed up by Bentzi or Ben Zion Gopstein. Now, Gopstein was indicted by an Israeli court in 2019 on charges of incitement to terrorism, violence and racism. Why is he still out then? Imagine the average person being charged on terrorism, violence and racism. You're going to get locked up for at least 4 years, minimum. And yes, he's free, but like Epstein. And no, he did not kill himself. Now, Gopstein was also a Knesset candidate for the Jewish Power Party, but was disqualified for racist comments he had made, and the Jewish Power's leader, Itamar Ben-Gvir, was elected in this year's Israeli elections, and the party has been an ally of the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, Ben-Gvir has also been indicted on charges of racism and inciting violence, and was recently present in the neighbourhood of Sheikh Jarrah, which is in East Jerusalem, alongside his close ally Gopstein. Now, the purpose of the two figures present in the disputed neighbourhood, it's not disputed, it belongs to Palestine, pure and simple, was to agitate demonstrators, calling for a halt to the targeted ethnic displacement of Palestinians from the area. They play both sides, you see. You heard Finkelstein and the other guy all mention the same thing. But Netanyahu failed to take any measures to prevent his ally Ben-Gvir from exacerbating the situation, which was slowly reaching boiling point. And the Huawei group follows the ideology of the deceased terrorist ideologue Meir Cohen, Rabbi Cohen. Remember, we covered him in one of the From Russia with Love shows, Plus. Now, Cohen founded the infamous Cash Party, which, despite making its way into an Israeli Knesset, was eventually banned and labelled a terrorist organisation in both the US and Israel. But new information revealed by Hablok, an Israeli anti-democratic activity monitoring organisation, has revealed that a complex web of non-profit organizations in the US, as well as Israel, are linked to the funding of the Kahanist groups. And according to the group's research, US money is being used to fund groups of Jewish extremists. Now, Lahava is actually not a charitable organization and is not open to direct contributions. Therefore, according to her blog, money is funneled to it through the Israeli non-profit, the Foundation for the Salvation of the People of Israel, and previously an Israeli funded called Kemla was also linked to it until 2014. Now, Hablock also claims that instead of directly funding Lahava, US money is funding a network around it and then fueling its activities. Now, the two US tax-exempt charities, the Charity of Light, oh dear, Charity of Darkness actually, and the American Friends of Yesavat Haraeon and Ha-Yehudi, fund carnist groups in Israel. Yet again, it's a common theme now. Americans funding death and destruction around the world, be it directly or indirectly. If it's not the government and the agencies, it is the people via their taxes and donations. You know, it was Americans who funded the IRA in Ireland, mainly the ones out of Boston. That led to many deaths in Britain due to their bombing campaign against the British, when a simple check of history reveals it was the Rothschilds' House of Orange that did the damage to Ireland, allied with the Catholic Church. Don't believe me? Go and check it yourself. And we have to stop giving to these charities unless you know how they spend it. Ignorance is now a choice. Final piece before the music break. We've seen notable opinion shifts on Israel, particularly amongst the young, and they're noticing it in Israel as well among democratic voters or young Jews. There can't possibly be any cracks developing among evangelicals, the question was asked. Well, actually, there is. And in fact, the poll suggests support is about to drop considerably in the coming years. Only 33.6% of young evangelicals between the age of 18 and 29 said they support Israel. 33.6%. 24.3% said they support Palestine, and 42.2% said they support neither side in the conflict. Now compare this to a survey, to a similar one that was carried out by UNCP professors just a few years ago in 2018. A staggering 69% of young evangelicals said they supported Israel back then. Now it's 33.6%. And just 5.6% said they supported the Palestinians, which is now 24.3%, and 25.7% didn't take a side. When asked who is more responsible for the violence in the Middle East, Israel or Hamas, people were asked, and here are all the results. The overall was Hamas 60%, Israel 40%. The 18 to 34, Israel 60%, 40% Hamas. So their own youth are blaming their own country. In the age range of 35 to 49, 51% said Israel were to blame, 49% said Hamas. And then it changes as you get older. 50 to 64, Hamas 72, Israel 28, 65 plus, Hamas 76%, Israel 24%. Now this is pleasing to see. The youth are not buying the old programs. And the Israeli youth are rejecting religion also, which is the drive behind the violence, based on some books from eons ago, most of which is proven false. Now the results prove the older ones still back the old system due to mind control and brainwashing tactics. But what is pleasing is the new generation are not buying into it. And that is why I said in 20 years' time, regardless of the work done between now and then, their old world will collapse around them. Gone will be the aging psychopaths. Gone will be many following the religious doctrine, which is mainly based in the older people. And a new culture will be born without the stigmas, dogmas, and pro-pagan dars of the past. Now the key will be to teach them a better way. In life there is no void. As one thing goes down, our goal is to replace it with something better.